The first sound I heard after 23 years of silence was my son David calling me a worthless burden to his wife Jennifer. 2 hours later, I walked into their kitchen with a smile on my face, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. That's when I realized my family had no idea what was coming for them. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Martinez at St. Mary's Hospital performed what he called a miracle surgery on my damaged ear canals. 23 years earlier, a drunk driver had crashed into my car, leaving me completely deaf, and my husband Robert dead. I'd learned sign language, lived quietly, and raised David the best I could as a single mother. The surgery was experimental, expensive, and had only a 30% success rate. David had been furious when I'd insisted on using my savings for it. "Mom, you're 68 years old. Why put yourself through this risk?" he'd argued. But something inside me refused to give up hope. The morning I woke up in the hospital recovery room, I heard a nurse's footsteps echoing down the hallway. Then her voice, clear as crystal, saying, "Good morning, Mrs. Sinclair. How are you feeling?" I cried for an hour straight, not from pain, but from pure joy. The world had sound again. Dr. Martinez was amazed. "Your hearing is actually better than normal range, Eleanor. It's like your brain compensated for all those lost years." He explained I'd need to adjust slowly, that sounds might seem overwhelming at first. He was right. Everything seemed amplified, from the beeping machines to the whispered conversations in the hallway. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of announcing my success immediately, I decided to surprise my family. I imagined their faces lighting up when I responded to their voices for the first time in over 2 decades. I pictured David's amazement, Jennifer's tears of joy, my grandchildren, Michael and Sarah, finally having real conversations with their grandmother. I spent a week in recovery practicing my poker face with the nursing staff. "Remember, not a word to anyone," I told them. "This is going to be the most wonderful surprise." They thought it was sweet, this grandmother planning such a loving revelation. The day before my discharge, David visited me. He sat beside my bed, moving his lips in the exaggerated way he'd developed over the years, assuming I was reading them. "Mom, Jennifer's prepared the guest room. You'll stay with us during recovery." His voice was strained, tired. I nodded and smiled, giving him a thumbs up like always. What I didn't realize was that I was about to discover who my family really was when they thought I couldn't hear them. And let me tell you, the truth was more devastating than 23 years of silence had ever been. I arrived at David and Jennifer's house on Maple Street, carrying the small overnight bag I'd packed at the hospital. Their two-story colonial looked exactly the same as it had for the past 15 years. Manicured lawn, white picket fence, and the American flag David insisted on flying year-round. I'd helped them buy this house when David was starting his accounting practice. Jennifer opened the front door with what I now recognize as a forced smile. Her lips moved in the slow, deliberate way she'd adopted since my accident. "Welcome home, Eleanor. We're so glad you're feeling better." Her voice was pleasant enough, but there was something in her tone I'd never noticed before. A subtle impatience, like she was reading from a script she'd rather not perform. I gave her my usual grateful nod and let her guide me inside. The guest room was on the first floor, converted from what used to be David's home office. Jennifer had decorated it with floral wallpaper and lace curtains. Her idea of what an elderly woman would find comforting. Honestly, it looked like a funeral parlor, but I'd never complained. How could I, when I couldn't hear their explanations anyway? "The bathroom is right across the hall," Jennifer said, her mouth moving with exaggerated precision. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." She patted my shoulder and left me to unpack. For 23 years, I'd lived in relative isolation. David visited twice a month. Jennifer accompanied him about half the time, and my grandchildren, Michael and Sarah, showed up for birthdays and major holidays. They were good kids, but they'd grown up with a grandmother who couldn't participate in normal conversations. Sign language had never come naturally to them. I'd filled my silent years with reading, gardening, and volunteering at the local food bank, where communication was mostly about sorting and organizing rather than talking. It had been a peaceful life, if lonely. I'd convinced myself that I was grateful for whatever contact my family provided. Now, as I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, I could hear everything. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down, the television in the living room playing some afternoon talk show. After decades of silence, it was almost overwhelming. But what struck me most was hearing my own breathing, my own heartbeat. For 23 years, I'd lived in a soundless bubble. Now I was part of the world again, able to eavesdrop on conversations, to understand context and subtext, to finally hear what people really thought when they believed no one was listening. David arrived home from work at exactly 6:15, just like he had every day for the past decade. I heard his key in the front door, his footsteps on the hardwood floor, the sound of his briefcase hitting the kitchen counter. "How's the patient?" he asked Jennifer. They were in the kitchen, probably assuming I was resting in the guest room with the door closed. "Fine, I guess," Jennifer replied. Her voice sounded different than it had an hour earlier. Less careful, more natural. "She seems tired, but that's expected after surgery." "Good. Hopefully this recovery goes quickly. I can't take much more time off work." There it was. The first crack in the facade. David wasn't concerned about my health. He was worried about the inconvenience my presence created in his schedule. That evening at dinner, I watched my family's faces while they performed what I now understood was elaborate theater for my benefit. David carved the roast beef with exaggerated gestures, making sure I could see every action. Jennifer pointed to each dish as she served it, mouthing the names slowly. Mashed potatoes, green beans, gravy. Michael, my 20-year-old grandson, was home from college for spring break. He sat across from me, occasionally waving and giving me thumbs up when he remembered I was there. Sarah, 18 and in her senior year of high school, barely looked up from her phone during the entire meal. For 2 decades, I'd assumed their behavior was simply the natural result of our communication barrier. How wrong I'd been. "Grandma looks good, doesn't she?" David said to Jennifer, speaking as if I weren't sitting right there. It's something people do around deaf individuals. They discuss you in your presence, assuming you can't understand. "The surgery was successful then?" Jennifer asked. "Too early to tell," David replied. "Dr. Martinez said it could take weeks to determine if there's any real improvement. But honestly, even if it works partially, she's 68. How much difference could it make?" I kept my expression neutral, continuing to eat my dinner while my heart pounded. This was my son talking about his mother's potentially life-changing surgery with all the enthusiasm of discussing a dental cleaning. "What did the doctor say about long-term care?" Jennifer asked, cutting her meat with sharp, precise movements. "Same as before. She can probably manage independently for a while longer. But we need to start thinking about alternatives." "Alternatives?" The word hung in the air like a threat. Michael looked up from his phone. "Are you talking about putting Grandma in a home?" "We're discussing options," David said carefully. "Your grandmother is getting older, and her needs are becoming more complex." "But she's been taking care of herself just fine," Sarah interjected, finally joining the conversation. Jennifer exchanged a look with David. "It's complicated, honey. Deaf elderly people face special challenges. We want what's best for your grandmother." I continued eating, maintaining the blank, pleasant expression I'd perfected over the years. Inside, my mind was racing. They weren't discussing my future with me. They were discussing what to do about me. After dinner, I helped clear the table, following my usual routine of washing dishes while Jennifer put away leftovers. The kitchen window faced the backyard where David was pushing our old lawnmower. Even though the grass barely needed cutting. "He's avoiding coming back inside," Jennifer muttered under her breath as she watched him through the window. I turned toward her, pretending I was trying to read her lips. She waved her hand dismissively and walked away. But I'd heard enough to understand that even Jennifer recognized David's discomfort with having me in their house. That night, lying in the guest room bed with its scratchy floral sheets, I listened to my family's real conversations through the thin walls. David and Jennifer's bedroom was directly above mine, and sound carried more than they realized. "How long is she staying?" Jennifer asked. Dr. Martinez said a week for observation, maybe 2 if there are complications. 2 weeks! David, 2 weeks of tiptoeing around, of watching every word, of pretending we're happy to have her here. I know, but what choice do we have? She's my mother. Your mother, who could have saved everyone trouble by just accepting that the surgery was a waste of money. I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling colder than the April evening warranted. This was how my family saw me. A trouble, an obligation, a burden they had to manage rather than a person they loved. But they had no idea I could hear every word. And that was about to become their biggest mistake. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Jennifer talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice carried clearly through the house, and I realized she was talking to someone about me. No, Mother, the surgery doesn't change anything. Even if her hearing improves, she'll still be elderly, still need supervision, still be our responsibility. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. Jennifer was talking to her own mother, discussing my future as if I were a piece of furniture they needed to relocate. David thinks we should wait and see. But honestly, I don't see the point. Brookside Manor has an opening in their assisted living wing. If we act quickly, we could have her settled there by summer. Brookside Manor, I knew the place. A nursing facility on the outskirts of town that smelled like disinfectant and had a reputation for warehousing elderly residents rather than caring for them. I understand it's expensive, Jennifer continued, but David's practice is doing well, and she has her own savings. Plus, there's the house. My house. The small ranch-style home I'd lived in for 43 years, where I'd raised David after Robert died, where I'd maintained my independence even after losing my hearing. They were discussing selling my house to pay for my imprisonment. I got dressed quietly and made my way to the kitchen where Jennifer was pouring coffee. She looked startled to see me up so early. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, switching back to her slow, deliberate lip movements. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded and smiled, pointing to the coffee pot. She poured me a cup, and I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to examine a magazine while she finished her phone conversation in the living room. "I'll call them this afternoon," I heard her tell her mother. "David doesn't need to know the details until we have everything arranged. It'll be easier for everyone that way." Easier for everyone except me, apparently. David emerged from upstairs, already dressed for work in his navy suit and striped tie. He kissed Jennifer goodbye and squeezed my shoulder. "Have a good day, Mom. Jennifer will take care of you." After he left, Jennifer settled into what appeared to be her daily routine of avoiding me. She cleaned the kitchen with aggressive efficiency, started a load of laundry, and then disappeared into her home office to work on some projects. I spent the morning exploring my temporary prison, listening to the sounds of a house I'd helped purchase, but was apparently no longer welcome in. The walls were thin, and I could hear Jennifer making phone calls, her voice carrying through the heating vents. The first call was to Brookside Manor. "I'd like to inquire about availability in your assisted living facility," she said. "For my mother-in-law. She's 68, recently had surgery, and we feel she needs more supervision than we can provide." The lies came so easily to her. I wasn't failing mentally or physically. I didn't need supervision. What I needed was a family that saw me as a person rather than a problem to be solved. The second call was to a real estate agent. "We may have a property coming available soon," Jennifer said. A small ranch home, well maintained in the Willowbrook neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, large backyard. Yes, I think it would sell quickly. My house. They were planning to sell my house before I was even aware they wanted me out of it. The third call was the one that broke my heart completely. David, it's me. I talked to both places this morning. Brookside has an opening, and Margaret thinks the house will sell within a month of listing. We need to move on this before your mother gets too comfortable with the idea of staying independent. There was a pause while David responded. I know it seems fast, but think about it logically. If the surgery works, she'll be more demanding, wanting to go places and do things. If it doesn't work, she'll be depressed and harder to manage. Either way, it's better to make the transition now while she's still adjusting. Another pause. No, we don't tell her anything until it's arranged. You know how stubborn she can be. Remember when she refused to give up driving? This is the same thing. Sometimes you have to make decisions for people who can't see what's best for them. I sat in the guest room, my hands trembling as I folded the same towel over and over again. They weren't just planning to betray me. They were proud of their cleverness, congratulating themselves on protecting me from my own supposed inability to make rational decisions. That afternoon, Michael came home from college classes. I heard him talking to Jennifer in the kitchen. How's Grandma doing? He asked. Fine, Jennifer replied. She's adjusting to being here. Are you guys really thinking about putting her in that nursing home? It's assisted living, Michael, not a nursing home. And yes, we're considering it. Your grandmother needs more care than she realizes. But she's been living alone just fine. That's what worries us. She's been isolated, not taking proper care of herself. The surgery was a desperate attempt to avoid facing reality. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their manipulation. They'd twisted my hope for reconnection into evidence of my incompetence. But they had made one crucial mistake. They'd given me the gift of hearing their true intentions while still believing I was deaf to them. And I was going to use that advantage in ways they never saw coming. Teaching her that elderly people were inherently incompetent and that family members who warehoused their parents were actually being compassionate.
Will we still see her?
Of course, Jennifer said quickly. Brookside has visiting hours. We'll see her regularly. But I had heard Jennifer's earlier conversation with her mother, where she'd complained about the obligation of visiting elderly relatives and expressed relief that Brookside was far enough away that we won't feel guilty if we can't make it there very often. Friday morning, I made my decision. I was going to give them exactly what they'd given me, a nasty surprise they'd never see coming. While Jennifer was at her Pilates class and David was at work, I used their computer to research everything I could about their financial situation. Jennifer had left her email open, and I discovered they'd been living beyond their means for years. David's accounting practice was struggling, they had 3 credit cards maxed out, and they'd been counting on my money to solve their problems long before my surgery. Jennifer had been planning this betrayal for months, maybe years. She'd researched nursing homes, calculated my assets, and even consulted with an elder law attorney about managing difficult transitions for aging family members. I also discovered she'd been corresponding with interior designers about renovating my house once it became available. She had detailed plans for turning my cozy 3-bedroom ranch into what she called a modern showpiece perfect for entertaining. They weren't just stealing my home. They were already planning to erase every trace of the life I'd built there. But Jennifer had made one crucial error in her research. She'd focused on legal ways to control elderly people, but hadn't considered what might happen if the elderly person discovered the plan before it was implemented. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls from the guest room while Jennifer was grocery shopping. I spoke quietly, keeping my voice low, but for the first time in 23 years, I was able to conduct important conversations without intermediaries or written notes. The first call was to my bank. I'd like to schedule an appointment to review my accounts and discuss some changes to my beneficiaries, I told them. The second call was to a lawyer, not the elder law attorney Jennifer had been consulting with, but a family law specialist who had excellent reviews for protecting elderly clients from financial abuse. The third call was to a private investigator who specialized in documenting elder abuse cases. By Sunday, I had enough evidence to destroy their plan and enough legal protection to ensure they'd never again be able to make decisions about my life without my explicit consent. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand yet. I wanted them to dig the hole deeper, to commit more fully to their betrayal, to show me exactly how far they were willing to go. Because once I revealed that I could hear every word they'd said, I wanted the consequences to be complete and irreversible. They taught me that family meant nothing when money was involved. Now I was going to teach them what happens when you underestimate a woman who's had 23 years to develop patience and the element of surprise. Monday morning arrived with Jennifer in full organizational mode. She'd scheduled my follow-up appointment with Dr. Martinez for Wednesday, though I'd heard her tell the scheduling nurse that she needed to discuss realistic expectations with my doctor about my cognitive state following the surgery. She was planning to convince my doctor that I was experiencing confusion and depression, laying the groundwork for her incompetency claims. While Jennifer bustled around the house preparing for what she believed would be a routine medical appointment, I sat in the guest room making final preparations for what would actually be the beginning of their worst nightmare. My private investigator, Janet Morrison, had already documented Jennifer's internet searches, her correspondence with Brookside Manor, and her consultations with real estate agents. More damning, she'd recorded Jennifer's phone conversations with her mother, where Jennifer admitted that I was perfectly capable mentally, but that sometimes you have to force elderly people to accept help for their own good. My lawyer, Robert Chen, had prepared a comprehensive protection order that would prevent anyone from making decisions about my finances, housing, or medical care without court approval. He'd also drafted a detailed complaint documenting the attempted financial exploitation and emotional abuse. But the piece de resistance was the recording device Janet had helped me install in the guest room. For the past 3 days, I'd been documenting every conversation David and Jennifer had about their plans, creating an audio record that would destroy any attempt to claim they were acting in my best interests. Tuesday evening, David came home with a bottle of wine and an unusually cheerful demeanor. He had apparently had a good day at work, probably because he'd been calculating how my money would solve his financial problems. "How's our patient?" he asked, kissing her cheek. "Good," Jennifer replied. "The appointment tomorrow should give us the information we need to move forward." They were in the kitchen, speaking in normal voices because they assumed I was napping in the guest room. I was actually sitting just around the corner in the dining room, listening to every word while pretending to read a magazine. "Did you talk to Marcus about the timeline?" Jennifer asked. "He thinks we should move quickly once we have medical documentation. If Dr. Martinez confirms that the surgery didn't work, we can present that as evidence that Mom's judgment is compromised. If it did work partially, we can argue that she's not adjusting well to the change. And if it worked completely," David laughed, actually laughed, "then we've got a bigger problem because she might start asking questions about why we're suddenly so interested in her living arrangements." "Don't worry," Jennifer said. "I've been researching what to say to doctors in these situations. There are ways to express concern that make medical professionals take notice. Depression, isolation, confusion about financial matters, difficulty adapting to change." "You're brilliant," David said, and I heard them kissing. They were brilliant. I had to admit they'd crafted a plan that appeared concerned and loving on the surface while being ruthlessly manipulative underneath. If I'd actually still been deaf, they might have succeeded completely, but I wasn't deaf anymore. And tomorrow, they were going to discover that their brilliant plan had one fatal flaw. That night, I made my final phone call to Robert Chen. "Everything's in place," I told him quietly while David and Jennifer watched television upstairs. "They're planning to poison the appointment tomorrow. I want you there." "Are you sure you're ready for this, Eleanor?" he asked. "Once we reveal what you know, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment they decided to betray me," I replied. "These people have been living in my house, eating food I helped pay for, and planning to steal my life savings while pretending to care about my well-being. I'm ready. Wednesday morning, Jennifer drove me to Dr. Martinez's office with what I now recognize as barely concealed anticipation. She was looking forward to this appointment, confident that she was about to take control of my life with medical legitimacy. In the waiting room, she sat beside me, occasionally patting my hand and speaking in her exaggerated lip-reading voice. "Don't worry about anything, Eleanor. Dr. Martinez just wants to check your progress." But I could see her real expression when she thought I wasn't looking. She was excited, almost gleeful, like a predator about to spring her trap. When the nurse called my name, Jennifer immediately stood up. "I'll come with you," she announced, "to help with communication." Dr. Martinez greeted us warmly in his office. "Mrs. Sinclair, how are you feeling?" Before I could respond, Jennifer launched into her performance. "Doctor, I'm concerned about my mother-in-law's adjustments since the surgery. She seems confused, withdrawn. She's been staying with us, and we've noticed some troubling signs." "What kind of signs?" Dr. Martinez asked, his expression becoming more serious. "Difficulty making decisions, sleeping poorly, not responding when we try to communicate. I think the surgery may have been too overwhelming for someone her age." I sat quietly, watching Jennifer weave her web of lies, knowing that in about 2 minutes, she was going to discover that her prey had grown teeth. Dr. Martinez turned to me. "Mrs. Sinclair, how would you describe your experience since the surgery?" I looked directly at him and spoke in a clear, strong voice. "Dr. Martinez, my hearing is perfect. In fact, it's better than it's been in 23 years. I can hear everything, including the conversations my family has been having about stealing my money and putting me in a nursing home against my will." Jennifer's face went white. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I've been pretending to still be deaf for the past week," I continued. "And what I've discovered is that my son and his wife have been planning to take control of my finances and sell my house to pay for my incarceration at Brookside Manor." That's not," Jennifer stammered. "Mr. Chen," I called toward the door, "you can come in now." My lawyer entered the office carrying a thick folder of documentation. "Mrs. Sinclair," Dr. Martinez said slowly, "are you telling me that your hearing has been completely restored?" "Test me," I challenged. He moved behind me and whispered softly, "Can you hear this?" "You said, 'Can you hear this?'" I replied, without turning around. Jennifer was now shaking. "Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I said, "was thinking that you could get away with elder abuse while I was helpless to stop you." I turned to face her fully for the first time in a week and smiled. "Surprise, Jennifer. Grandma's not as helpless as you thought." The look of horror on her face was worth 23 years of silence. Now the real fun was about to begin. "You were trying to help yourselves to my bank account." Dr. Martinez looked between us, clearly trying to process what he was witnessing. "Mrs. Sinclair, your hearing test results were exceptional. There's no medical reason why you couldn't continue living independently." "That's what I told my lawyer," I said, standing up. "Jennifer, you can call David and let him know that his mother is not only hearing perfectly, but also thinking quite clearly. Clear enough to have moved my money to a new bank account yesterday." Jennifer's face went from white to green. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the $200,000 you were counting on to pay for your financial problems, it's now safely protected in an account you'll never have access to. My house has been transferred to a revocable trust with a reputable management company, and I filed a restraining order preventing either of you from making any decisions about my care or finances." I picked up my purse, feeling more empowered than I had in 23 years. "Oh, and Jennifer, you might want to start looking for a new place to live. I'll be moving back into my house this weekend, and I believe you'll find that your lease on the Maple Street property expires at the end of this month." Robert Shen handed Jennifer a thick envelope. "Legal notice of all proceedings. You have 72 hours to vacate Mrs. Sinclair's property and cease all contact except through legal representation." As we walked toward the door, I turned back to face Jennifer one last time. By the way, I heard every conversation you had with those interior designers about renovating my house. I particularly enjoyed your plans to turn my late husband's workshop into a wine cellar. The sound of Jennifer's sob followed us into the hallway, but I felt nothing but satisfaction. David's reaction was even better than Jennifer's. When I arrived at the house with Robert Shen and a sheriff's deputy to collect my belongings, David was waiting in the driveway with the kind of fury that comes from having your carefully laid plans destroyed. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted as I got out of the lawyer's car. "Language, David," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming my life from the children who tried to steal it." "We were trying to help you." "Were you helping me when you told Marcus that my confusion and depression would justify your guardianship claim? Or were you helping me when Jennifer researched the fastest way to liquidate my assets?" David's face crumpled. He'd forgotten that I might have heard those conversations. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to step aside while Mrs. Sinclair collects her property." "This is insane," David protested, but his voice had lost its edge. "Mom, you can't just destroy our family over a misunderstanding." "I'm not destroying anything, David. You destroyed it when you decided I was worth more to you warehoused in a nursing home than living freely in my own house." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen. "Eleanor, please, we can work this out. We're family." "Family doesn't steal from each other," I replied, brushing past her into the house. "Family doesn't lie about medical conditions to facilitate financial exploitation. Family doesn't count the days until they can get rid of their inconvenient elderly relatives." I gathered my few belongings while David and Jennifer watched helplessly. 23 years of silence had taught me patience, but it had also taught me the value of decisive action. When the moment arrived, as I packed, I could hear them whispering desperately in the kitchen, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage their plan. There wasn't. "The moving truck will be here tomorrow for my furniture," I announced as I prepared to leave. "I trust you'll have it ready for pickup." "Where are you going to live?" David asked. And for a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. "In my house, David. The house I've lived in for 43 years. The house you were planning to sell without telling me." "But you can't live alone. You need help." I smiled at him, and I made sure it was the coldest smile I could manage. "I've been living alone for 23 years, son. The only help I needed was protection from my own family." Robert Chen handed David his own legal envelope. "Outstanding loan documentation. Your mother has graciously decided not to pursue immediate collection of the $68,000 you've borrowed from her over the past 5 years, provided you cease all contact and make no further attempts to interfere with her life." David stared at the papers, his face reflecting the dawning realization that their financial problems had just become exponentially worse without my money to solve them. Moving back into my own house felt like resurrection. Every familiar corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the mantel welcomed me home with sounds I'd forgotten I missed. The creak of the kitchen floorboard, the whistle of the tea kettle, the gentle hum of the refrigerator. But the sweetest sound was my phone ringing with calls from David and Jennifer that I simply didn't answer. Janet Morrison, my private investigator, stopped by on my third day home with a final report that was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. "Your son and daughter-in-law are in serious financial trouble," she reported, settling into my living room with a cup of coffee. "Without your money, they can't make their mortgage payments. David's practice has been hemorrhaging clients, and Jennifer's spending has put them about $40,000 in credit card debt." "How unfortunate," I said, though I felt nothing resembling sympathy. "It gets better. Jennifer called Brookside Manor to cancel your admission, and when they asked why, she had to admit that you'd never actually agreed to be admitted. Turns out, making false medical claims about elderly relatives is something they take very seriously. They've reported her to Adult Protective Services." I nearly choked on my coffee. They reported Jennifer for attempted elder abuse? Apparently, this isn't the first time someone has tried to use their facility to warehouse a competent elderly person against their will. They have protocols. The irony was delicious. Jennifer's own research had led her to a facility that was specifically trained to recognize and report the kind of abuse she'd been attempting. "There's more," Janet continued. "Your granddaughter Sarah called me. She wants to see you." That evening, Sarah knocked on my front door carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing an expression of absolute mortification. "Grandma," she said when I opened the door, "I heard what Mom and Dad were planning. I had no idea." "Come in, sweetheart," I said, and the joy of speaking directly to my granddaughter without interpreters or exaggerated lip movements was overwhelming. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd fed her cookies and milk during childhood visits, and had our first real conversation in her adult life. "I knew something was weird," Sarah admitted. "Mom kept talking about how you needed professional care, but you've always seemed fine to me. Independent, you know?" "I am independent," I assured her. "I was just temporarily unable to hear my family planning to steal from me." Sarah laughed, then caught herself. "Is it okay to find this funny? Because honestly, what they did was awful, but the way you caught them is kind of brilliant." "It's okay to laugh, honey. Sometimes revenge is the only reasonable response to betrayal." We talked for 2 hours about her college plans, her boyfriend, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. All conversations I'd missed during her teenage years because of the communication barrier that no longer existed. When she prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated at the door. "Grandma, are you ever going to forgive them?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation, Sarah. I might eventually forgive them for their selfishness and greed, but I'll never trust them again. And I'll never pretend that what they did was acceptable family behavior. "I understand," she said, hugging me tightly. "Can I come visit you again?" "Anytime you want, sweetheart. I have 23 years of grandmother conversations to catch up on." The final act of my revenge came 6 months later. Though I hadn't planned it quite that way, David and Jennifer lost their house in foreclosure. Without my money to fall back on, their accumulated debt and David's failing business created a financial collapse they couldn't prevent. They were forced to move into a small apartment across town while I continued living comfortably in my perfectly maintained home. The poetic justice was that Jennifer ended up taking a job at Brookside Manor, the very facility where she'd planned to imprison me. Apparently, they needed someone to process admission paperwork, and her research into elder care had given her relevant experience. I learned this information from Margaret, my next-door neighbor, who had become a close friend since my return home. Margaret and I spent our mornings gardening together and our evenings playing bridge with two other women from the neighborhood. For the first time in decades, I had an active social life. Jennifer looked exhausted when I saw her at the grocery store, Margaret reported one Thursday evening. She kept staring at the price of everything like she couldn't believe how expensive things had become. "How sad," I replied, though my tone suggested otherwise. The final revelation came when Michael called me directly, something he'd never done when he thought I couldn't hear. "Grandma," he said, "I wanted you to know that I'm not taking any money from my parents for college. I got a full scholarship to state, and I want to earn my own way." "That's wonderful, Michael. I'm proud of you." "I'm ashamed of them," he admitted. "What they did to you was unforgivable." "They're still your parents, Michael. Don't let my relationship with them poison yours entirely." "It's not about you, Grandma. It's about who they showed themselves to be. I don't want to become the kind of person who sees elderly relatives as financial opportunities." A week later, Michael started visiting me regularly. Unlike his parents, he was genuinely interested in my stories, my opinions, my experiences as a woman who'd lived through 7 decades of American history. One evening, as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset, Michael asked the question I'd been expecting. "Grandma, do you ever regret how things turned out?" I thought about David and Jennifer struggling in their cramped apartment, about the grandchildren who'd learned to value integrity over inheritance, about the independence I'd reclaimed and the respect I'd demanded. "Michael," I said finally, For 23 years, I lived in silence. I accepted whatever scraps of attention my family offered, grateful for any contact at all. I made myself small and undemanding because I thought that's what love required. I sipped my iced tea, enjoying the sound of ice cubes clinking against glass. But love doesn't require you to accept abuse. Family doesn't mean allowing people to steal from you while pretending it's for your own good. And being elderly doesn't mean surrendering your right to make decisions about your own life. The Crickets were beginning their evening concert, and I marveled again at being able to hear them. Your parents taught me something valuable, even if they didn't mean to. They taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually your biggest threat. And they taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I looked at my grandson, this young man who'd chosen integrity over easy money, principle over family loyalty. So, no, Michael, I don't regret how things turned out. For the first time in over 2 decades, I'm exactly where I belong, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. It's been 2 years since I regained my hearing and discovered my family's betrayal. David and Jennifer have never apologized, though Jennifer did send a Christmas card last year with a note saying she hoped I was happy with my choices. I am, actually. Happier than I've been since Robert died. My house is filled with sound again. Friends visiting, music playing, my own voice reading books aloud just because I can. I've joined a book club, started taking piano lessons, something I'd wanted to do for decades, and even begun dating a widower named Frank, who lives 3 streets over. Sarah graduated high school with honors and visits me every few weeks when she's home from college. Michael stops by regularly, and we've developed the kind of close relationship I never thought possible with my grandchildren. They've both made it clear that they want nothing from David and Jennifer's eventual inheritance, preferring to build their own lives on their own terms. David's accounting practice failed completely. He now works as a bookkeeper for someone else's firm, earning a fraction of what he made when he was stealing from me. Jennifer is still at Brookside Manor, where she's learned firsthand how elderly people are treated when their families decide they're inconvenient. I've been told they blame me for their financial ruin, as if my refusal to fund their lifestyle was somehow unreasonable. They still don't understand that the money was never theirs to begin with. Last month, I received a visit from a woman named Patricia, whose elderly father was facing a similar situation with his own children. Word had gotten around about my case, and she wanted advice. "How did you find the strength to fight back?" she asked. I thought about her question for a long time before answering. Strength isn't something you find, I told her. It's something you remember you always had. For 23 years, I thought my deafness made me vulnerable and dependent, but it actually made me self-reliant and observant. I'd learned to read people's faces, to pick up on subtle cues, to survive on my own resources. I poured her another cup of coffee, marveling again at the simple pleasure of being able to hear it percolating. When I discovered I could hear again, I had a choice. I could continue being the grateful, undemanding, elderly woman my family expected, or I could use the skills I developed during my silent years to protect myself from their greed. Patricia nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Your father isn't helpless, I continued. He's experienced. He's survived decades of life, made countless decisions, overcome obstacles you can't even imagine. Don't let anyone convince him that age equals incompetence. 6 months later, Patricia sent me a card. Her father had successfully fought off his children's attempt to control his finances and was living independently in his own home with appropriate support services. These days, I spend my mornings working in my garden, my afternoons reading or visiting with friends, and my evenings enjoying the symphony of sounds that most people take for granted. Wind chimes on the porch, birds in the backyard, the distant sound of children playing in the neighborhood. But the most satisfying sound of all is silence. The absence of David and Jennifer's voices planning my destruction. They gave me back my hearing, though they didn't mean to. In trying to silence me permanently, they taught me the value of my own voice. And now that I can hear again, I'll never let anyone silence me again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's getting everything you deserve and nothing you don't. I'm 70 years old. I own my own home. I have money in the bank. I'm surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. And I haven't written a single check to support my ungrateful son in over 2 years. Life is good when you can hear it clearly. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.